I think the main question here would, of course, be, is there a fundamentally new way that companies have to look at what they want to do in terms of corporate structure, corporate growth, and social welfare, or are we still speaking from an old hymn sheet? Is there a fundamental change that's needed? Who wants to kick us off?
Well, that depends who you ask.
Right.
Because some are doing very good, and some are doing less good. And I can tell you, from my experience, that companies who do make CSR, corporate social responsibility, as their culture, for them there's also a return on investment, which of course for every company is quite important.
How do you make that not a zero-sum game?
Well, I think first of all, the remarks Emma made in her speech were very spot on. I think business has contributed a lot to social values within Europe. And is a change in our vision needed? I think a little bit, because we have now the climate and sustainability challenge ahead of us. We have the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN for the global level. So I would say that the challenges that we face to contribute in the right way are growing even bigger. In the field of climate, but also in the field of, let's say, bringing our social and sustainable values to the global market. And that's what we have to talk about. And we think that when there is a contribution, it has to come from business, but in order to implement it, we need a new cooperation between government and the EU, businesses, citizens, and we have to make a new framework for the global level. That's what we think, and that was also what Emma mentioned. We need more policies, trade policies, which work on a global level towards level playing field, towards honoring the values that we think that are important. And we should, of course, also in cooperation with the government, we should loosen the powers of business, the creativity of business, to come up with solutions for the climate change.
That would be an interesting point for you to come in on, Henryka.
You know, I think that being the only woman besides moderator on the panel and facing the audience, which is dominated by men, I mean that I should and I have to concentrate on the issue which is very close to my heart. And because mostly of the Me Too action is right now very, very popular, or I can say not in a good meaning of this popularity, that means the value, which is extremely important, and we definitely, as a business community, have to work on that. That means diversity and gender equality. I think that a lot has been done here. I mean, I just can remind, you know, the actions by Viviane Reding, the Lord Davies report in the UK, Club 30%, you know, which is, you know, in many countries, but there is definitely a lot of room for improvement. And I think that business community doesn't have to wait for the EU directives or the governmental actions. This is something that we should work on, propose good practices, and first implement it. Because, you know, everybody knows about Harvey Weinstein and, you know, actresses that are on the Me Too action. But if you go to the hashtag Me Too, you can see there are hundreds of cases, you know, which are very much business, you know, cases. And that's why I mean that we definitely should look with a different view at this, and we have to implement actions that would show that business first is sensitive to that, and the business can introduce actions that actually would change this very, very bad situation.
Yeah?
Yes, I think maybe we have to start with what do the people want. They want jobs, they want purchase power, they want wealth and health, but more than that, they want hopes and pride. That means that in all countries, and especially in France, we have been in a election program, and you're with Emmanuel Macron at the end, which is a good news. But before, we have the extremes, left and right. And I think it's true in all countries. So what do the people want? They want that. And they want to have a hope for the future, European future, and to be proud of being a European. And I think business can bring that. Business, of course, can bring jobs. Business can bring purchase power. Business can bring wealth and health, of course. But we can bring together an ambition for Europe through values. And I fully share the fact that we need to build an economical performance of excellence facing the giants of China, India, United States, Africa. So we need to be together, first of all, which is so important. And then the values are to build a strong Europe which can bring wealth and health to our people. But we cannot give jobs forever. So this is where it's so important to make a pedagogy of what the business, what the companies can bring to the citizens, to Europe, to our people in our country in order to avoid populism. And if we do that with a strong pedagogy, what we have done, in fact, a little bit in France, saying all what we can bring in terms of values, bringing wealth, health, jobs to the people and to young through business, and taking care of the environment. Because if we want to last in the future, bring a business prosperity for the next 10, 20 years, we need to create jobs, of course, but to protect environment. So I think that this strategy of being very strong in terms of economy, innovative, competitive, this is the first key questions. Being profitable, because without profit, you won't do anything.
And profitability would then bring up the question of Luca.
That brings to sharing the values, that brings to sharing the riches and the wealth. Because if you keep the wealth for yourself or for only your stakeholders, you won't get to fulfillment, empowerment of your people. So I think this is the key. We come back to the CSR trilogy, which is so important to last and to build a strong Europe.
Where do you come in on that, Luca? Because it does become a question of value systems and then the trust of workers and consumers.
Yeah. Well, I will start from the fundamental value that is at the basis of the European treaties, that is social market economy. This is our special, let's say, way to address competition in the markets, but at the same time also fairness, sharing, protection, investment, human capital, and so on. Social market economy is really the fundamental pillar of the European Union. And in this respect, I think that businesses on the one side, business organizations, but businesses themselves on the one side, and workers on the other side, and the organizations representing workers, are really the key player to make sure that the social market economy, this incredibly fantastic balance that we have reached in the European Union, can really perform also for the future. We are really the actors to make change happening in a fair and shared way. This is the real challenge we have in front of us. And at the moment, I mean, we really face incredible problems in this respect. Because, first of all, we need to make sure that growth becomes sustainable and stable. And this is not yet the case, unfortunately. And how to make sure also how this stable and sustainable growth can be transformed into quality and stable job creation. Pierre said, people need jobs, people need better wages, people need to share the results in the economy, people want to contribute to all this. And the social partners, businesses and trade unions on the other side, well, we can do that. We can really contribute to this kind of improvement in this respect. It was said by Emma at the really beginning that the social partners were the founders, I mean, of these values in the European Union, and we have really to renovate and to relaunch this role for the future. There are incredible challenges in front of us, as it was said, I mean, climate change, digitalization, automation, changes in the global economy, trade, free trade at the global level. Are we able at the same time to protect our economy, to protect our industry, to protect our workers, but at the same time to be able to play a role in the global competition? This is the real challenge, and I think that we all together, we can make it.
I agree very much with that, and I think that we should be aware of the fact that Europe is an enormous soft power. We have a very big market. We are a wealthy, prosperous part of the world, and we should use that power, that position more in our global actions. And we should engage more on a global level with other continents and other countries to make our values, as you mentioned, so, the social economy, but also the sustainable economy. We should make our values part of the trade negotiations that we have with China, the US, etc., etc. And that is, I think, a new goal for the EU. We have been very, very successful in the field of social economy, peace, prosperity, etc., etc. Emma has shown it in her speech. Very successful. That still needs focus for the coming decades. But next to that, I think, we need to have a focus on how do we play our role on the global stage, and how do we engage with other continents and make sure that our values are part of, let's say, level playing field agreements and that sort of things in the world.
Henryka?
You know, even on the gender equality, I'm looking at this from the perspective of the economists, you know. And when you look at the numbers, that in almost every country in Europe, you know, the better educated part of the society, they are women, right? In my country, 60% of the population with the college education, they are women, right? And when you are looking at the demographic trends, and we know that all of us, we are facing problems to find people that can, you know, work in our companies. And then we look at the percentage of women who are on the labor market and how they are excluded from the labor market. So there is definitely no contradiction between the profitability and at the same time equal rights for the part of the society which is unfortunately excluded from, you know, our growth. Because, you know, yesterday there was the report done by the Financial Times on the bonuses in one of the investment banks, right? And, you know, you can see, because fortunately, and this is a good practice that actually we can definitely implement in other countries, that they have to disclose, all the companies which are having more than 250 workers, they have to disclose the gender gap, you know, in pays. And what it occurred that, you know, bonuses for women were 80% lower than for men, right? So this is what we are talking about, right? Jobs, access to money, you know, financial independence. So it seems to me that that needs from us just different perspective, right? That if we accept the fact that we can have, you know, gains from having more women working and having them on the higher positions, then you can see that that works for the company, that works for the GDP growth, and that definitely works for women. But I am not talking about women, because if we talk about diversity, that means about the
Is there an example,
old people.
sorry to interrupt you, but is there an example of a cultural shift within a company, within your group? Has someone implemented that? Because that is an issue, as you've pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that fortunately, because this issue is becoming, you know, more visible, so you can see the companies, and first there was the McKinsey study showing that if you have more than 30% of women on the management boards, you know, the profitability of the companies is growing up. Sweden, the country which is, you know, the highest on the innovation scoreboard, at the same time is the #1 country as far, you know, as the equal rights for women are concerned. So that means that definitely you can transfer this social issue into the very good financial result.
Yes, I think Henryka is right. I think for building a strong and very, enthusiastic Europe for the next 20 years, we'll need all the skills, all the talents. We'll have a problem of talents and finding jobs, finding talents, finding skills in our countries, in our companies. So women, of course, as 50% of the population, well, minority and so on. We need to integrate more, to motivate more, to pay the people for their skills and not for their sex or anything. So I fully share what Henryka said. But the skills are one problem, which is more a political problem than our problem. second problem that politics has to solve is a trustful environment, which means social and fiscal, as well as decreasing the complexity of our regulations. Because especially in France, you know, we have been working with codes, laws everywhere, a lot of standards and so on. I think Europe, and especially our politicians, has to take care of skills, talents, first of all. They have to take care of putting us a good place, a pro-business environment in terms of social, labor law, tax law, and a simplification of everything. And third thing that we are looking for is a competitiveness environment. And if we have that, thanks to decreasing the deficits, the debts, and the public expenses, this is the responsibility. Our responsibility in terms of business are innovation, creativity, excellence in all what we do in terms of operation, management, cash, people, of course, and selling, promoting, exporting. This is our duty. This is our missions. We have to innovate, to produce, to sell well. To do that, we need people, manage well. We need to manage our cash. This is our problem. And their problem, you know, is to give us the right pro-business, attractiveness, simple environment. And if we do that together with a strong trust, strong dialogue between ourselves and the politics, together for the same goal, have a strong and united Europe, facing China, United States, Africa, India, which are big colossus, we can do together a good business community, a good economical program for Europe, which will share profits, wealth, health to our people, to the citizens, and taking care of the environment, because it's so important to take care of the three things all together.
So, Jens,
we share the responsibilities.
That's an interesting point, that it's a shared responsibility, and is it the job of the politicians to try and understand the fact that this is a very politically sensitive time across the world. There's a lot of things going on, and stability is absolutely key for businesses in Europe. How do you, as a politician or an MEP, or whether you're at national level politics, how do you help these companies create the jobs that you want them to create? And then spread the wealth.
We can't create the jobs, but we can create...
How do you help them create the jobs?
We can create the framework.
Yeah.
Stability, transparency, democracy, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, which is threatened, I'm sorry to say, by some countries in Europe, and we have to take that very, very seriously, I will have to say. But can I ask a question? Because I fully agree as for the words you put forward about protecting our values and exporting our values, because that's key if we don't want to make a run to the bottom comparing with China and all these. My question would be, how do you think the CETA agreement, was it a good start in that perspective, or should we have done more? And if, what should be done?
I think CETA was a good start. And it's also a very bad thing that we didn't carry on with TTIP. Because I think it is important to note that, say, in the Atlantic atmosphere and the Atlantic part of the world, values are closer to each other than when it comes to, for example, value base that we have and compare it with Asia. So it's a good start with Canada, and we should, and I hope that we will pick up again the TTIP negotiations sometime in the future with the US, and try to create the right value base, social economy in the Atlantic atmosphere. And from there on, that's what I stated earlier, it's very important that the EU makes its place and engages in the right negotiations with Asia to make sure that our values, as you mentioned, are being exported. That's one aspect. The other aspect, which is very important, we think, and it was also mentioned in the speeches, is that our neighbor is Africa. We all know the demographic developments in Africa. if we do not succeed in giving all those new and young Africans, giving them a better economic future, then they will come to Europe and find their future here. And then our system of values will be threatened. Because we are not talking about 1 million, but several million of people who would come over. And so I think it's very important that building on the very good results that Europe has achieved in the last 60, 70 years, building on that, we should now add focus, a new focus also on the place that the EU takes on the global stage. Business cannot be missed there, because business does investment, business creates jobs, business is there for innovation, business is there, let's say, to be so competitive that we also can sustain our social economy, what you mentioned earlier. And we need the governments and the EU institutions to take care of level playing field conditions on a global scale to export our values. And I think that's the new challenge for the EU. But it's also a big opportunity for the EU, because I believe firmly that, I see it with my companies in the Netherlands, but also with citizens. Citizens want to see results in this field. They want to see that, for example, a proactive attitude towards migration and immigration flows. They want to see the EU acting effectively and efficiently on these kind of issues. And that's an opportunity for the EU, because that could give a new wave of support to that very good institution.
May I comment? Sorry. May I comment just a moment about CETA? Because CETA is a very good example of what we should or we should not do. You remember perfectly what happened, I mean, in the negotiations of CETA. The first version of the agreement was very bad, and it created incredible troubles. I mean, people in the street, protests, I mean, bad reactions, etc., etc. Then, let's say, businesses, trade unions, workers' representatives, NGOs, etc., forced, let's say, the institutions, the negotiators, to involve them into the picture and to reopen, to some extent, the negotiations, to try to make the agreement a bit better. And there was a bit of confused negotiation, if you want, a second stage, let's say, correction of the agreement. But this confused process led to a very good result, because the final result of CETA, I think, is the best trade agreement we have in the world at the moment. Because we manage at the same time to open up the markets, but at the same time also to protect our industry, to protect our services, to protect our workers and businesses. So why it's not possible to prevent the problem instead of correcting the problem with a so-called ex-post approach? Why it's not possible, I mean, to open the dialogue before the things happen, and by involving the actors of the economy and the civil society, businesses, trade unions, and other subjects, I mean, making sure that the society can participate, I mean, in shaping the future we want to see for the European Union in the global dimension. In this respect, you know, we, businesses and trade unions, we have two extraordinary tools in our hands. One is social dialogue, and the other one is negotiations, our capacity to deliver collective bargaining. And we have two big challenges in front of us. I would like to provoke you. Can we do something for that together? First, we have incredibly low levels of productivity and wages at the moment in the European Union. The situation deteriorated a lot, I mean, in the last years because of the crisis, etc., etc. Can we do something together to make sure that productivity and wages can raise up together in a very holistic and comprehensive and sustainable approach to the economy? We can do that as social partners. We can really push in this direction to make sure that our economies perform better in terms of productivity and competitiveness, but at the same time there is also redistribution and sharing for workers participating in this process. And the other challenge is the future of the economy. Climate change, digitalization, automation, and so on. Are we able together to shape this future and make sure, I mean, that on the one side, the European economy will be the most innovative one in the future in the global competition, but at the same time that workers participate in a positive way in this development, not by being left behind, but having more jobs, more quality jobs, putting their skills at disposal of competitiveness and productivity, and making sure that we all together can really shape, I mean, the future of the digital economy and of innovation. We can do it. And we can also tell politicians together what they should do, I mean, to help us in shaping the future in this way. This is, I think, really the role we can play in terms of value, but also in terms of practical actions.
I think that brings up the question, right? I mean, you made a clear point of the fact that there is a trust issue here. When people look at the wage growth, they look at corporate cultures, they look at corporate profitability, there is a question of trust. How do you regain the trust of workers, of customers? I mean, at some point they are working for another corporate. How do you change that value system to balance shareholder requirements, balance profitability, and get the trust back to be able to come back on the table with all of the social partners and the politicians and come up with policies together? Yeah?
Well, trust for me is a key point. It's a key point. Without trust, and that was true for France for a while, where business people didn't trust the politics and the governments. And nothing happened. No investments, no jobs. Everybody was waiting. So hopefully we have a new president, and trust is back. So people want to invest. People want to hire. And this is true for a country, this is true for a company. If you don't have trust in your company, between your workers and your president, or that you don't go too far. So trust is essential. So how do we build trust? I think the point is dialogue, is discussions, is ambition. Which project? What do we share? What type of objective do we have? Project, 5 years, 10 years. Where do we want to go? And sharing to the situation, the present situation. This is a force, the strengths, these are weaknesses. And if you are in a trustful dialogue, saying where we want to go, where we are, and what are the action plans that we share, taking the best ideas, so very much bottom-up dialogue. That means listening to the people and try to have a consensus at the end. That should work. I mean, this is how it works normally. Then I would like to come back to growth, because we spoke about opportunities and TTIP, CETA. It's so important, because without growth, we won't create jobs. This is true for a company, this is true for a country, this is true for EU. Where are the growth? Growth are, of course, the single market, 500 million inhabitants, important. But growth is outside Europe. It's China, Africa. Africa is so important because it's 1 billion inhabitants will come to 2 billion inhabitants. In 2050, if we don't care, if we don't take care of Africa, we will have major problems, not only in Africa, but in Europe. And this is another opportunity for us, for business, because we can bring them everything. We can bring their education, training, jobs, local jobs. And of course, this is a win-win thing between Africa and the EU. Then creating the future. So innovation in the digital economy, in a world which is moving like that, we have tremendous opportunities for Europe to create the next generation of environment, climate, digital, artificial intelligence, systems, equipments, services, components. And this is just to say the future is bright for us. Just let us.
How do you balance it with profitability and shareholder requirements? That's, I think, the ultimate question.
Yes, but if you bring the hope, if you bring the vision, if you bring the growth, and if you bring everything, and that you take care of your citizens, of your salaries, of your employees, by sharing this growth, by sharing these profits, I mean, you do a great job. And I think this is something that has to be explained, that has to be put in place. It's not so easy. And this is where the social dialogue with the trade unions are so important, because I understand Luca, and we have, we share the same vision for Europe. We want the same thing for our kids, by the way. So after that, it's a question of being more social or being a bit more liberal. But it's always the same thing. But if we share the same things, we need to create jobs and welfare and share the wealth. That should be a good program for the, especially against populism. Because the problem of Europe we have right now is how are we sure that we won't have another Brexit? In 6 months, in 1 year? How can we be sure that the countries we are in, the extremes will not get in force.
Henryka is in a country where a number of questions are being raised on that. So what's your view on that?
You know, I mean that countries of transformation, I mean, they are learning, you know, how to use, for example, the concept of social dialogue, which is absolutely unique in Europe. And definitely, you know, brings a lot of positive value. But on the other hand, I think that we have to remember that in Poland, but in all the countries, right now the job market, you know, is completely changing. So we have to think about the future ways of the dialogue. Because if you have, you know, an access to the social media, okay, and people, I mean, they work in different places. Some of them, they are self-employed, you know. They don't see the employer at all, right? So that means that if we want to have really, you know, positive relations within the society, we as employers and trade unions, we have to think about our future roles, because the company of the future would be completely different from the company, I mean, not on the past, but of today's. And it seems to me that we are far away within the European Union from this discussion. How we should work in the future when the job relations will be very different, when we have to adjust to completely new instruments, new ways of communication, because otherwise people, they would communicate, but not via our channels, you know, but they will find their own ways, as usual on the market, you know. People are very creative, and it seems to me that we are still struggling, you know, how to find a way that the representatives of employers and the representatives of employees, you know, can communicate for the good of the, you know, companies, but at the same time for the good of the society, because we are playing more and more very different roles. So, I mean, we don't have time to talk about this here, but definitely we are in the time of big change, and it's very challenging. To me, it's wonderful, because again, I mean, something new is ahead of us, but sometimes I think that we, as employers, we are struggling with these new ways of communication with our employees that we sometimes don't see them at all, right? No. We just pay them money, right?
Well, it's difficult when you're in the gig economy. I can attest to that as well. But I want to open this up to our audience, because I know we don't have a lot of time to continue a conversation that probably could take us like 5 hours to even start touching on the surface of it. So if anyone has a question for our panel, put your hand up. We'll get our mics to you right away. Anyone? Or we'll just keep going on with this conversation, which is fascinating anyway. Right, we will. I think the question that you were about to pick up on what Henryka was saying.
Well, first of all, I agree with what Henryka says. Things are changing, the way we do business, the way the roles between employers and employees, things are changing. But to address that and to look forward, we need the social dialogue. And we agree on certain things, especially when I look to my experience in the Netherlands. We, for example, agree very much on the fact that education, new types of education for young people, should be at the core of a new social contract. So that's one thing. And also, Henryka is right with the fact that she says we need next levels with Europe, because Europe has been very successful on its original goals, prosperity and peace, very successful. We should celebrate that. That's something to be grateful for, to be proud of. Very good. But as was also stated this morning, to keep it that way, we need the focus. Pierre was stressing, we need competitiveness, we need research and development, we need innovation, and we need, let's say, people within the borders of the EU who are capable of working in the new circumstances, the circumstances that you just mentioned, who are capable of working with the new trends in digitalization and that sort of things. Which means that has to be done by governments as well as by companies. We need to invest in education, in new types of education. And that's one thing. And the other thing, and I say it again, is the other next level, and a third goal, a new goal for the EU is to make its presence felt in a very constructive and self-confident way on the global stage. That's what we see, and we have to work in that direction, also to preserve the values that we have created here so well within Europe as it is today.
Luca, it sounds very nice.
You know, what Henryka say is absolutely crucial,
yeah.
I mean. Because, you know, we have, say, 1/3 probably, on average, of the labor market in Europe that is completely new to us. They are, let's say, self-employed people, let's call it like this, but, you know, even this definition doesn't fit properly, but let's say self-employed people that are where the limit between being an entrepreneur or being a worker is not understandable, I mean. The limit doesn't exist any longer, I mean. It's something like a gray zone, I mean, where people simply try to do something, I mean, in the economy. They try to put their skills at the disposal of the economy, and they try to get, a remuneration and a decent life, I mean, through what they do in the economy. But the form of their work is not possible to be defined, because it doesn't pertain, I mean, to the traditional categories that we have seen so far, I mean, in our normal relationship between employers' representatives and workers' representatives. So this element is a challenge for all of us. And the point is what we can do, I mean, to represent these people and to try to provide them with replies to their needs, I mean. It's a matter of giving them opportunities on the one side, on the other side also to give to them some kind of protection and rights that probably are different from the ones that we are used, I mean, to talk about. So we need really to discuss between us, I mean, to try to find the ways, I mean, to represent these people and to try to provide them with concrete replies, as I say, to their needs. Also because, you know, this is linked to the issue that Pierre was raising, populism. Who are the people that go for populism? Either people that are not represented, like this kind of categories of workers, let's say, or people that are completely excluded. Because they don't have a job, they have a very poor job, they cannot get a decent salary, they don't have proper protection, etc. These are the two elements, not being represented or being excluded. So if we put together our forces and our creativity and our values, I mean, maybe we can try to address these problems, of course, together with the politicians, but, you know, we have also a responsibility and a role to play to prevent populism by addressing the problems that are linked to the people that are either not represented or completely excluded from the economy and the society. This is something we could do together, I think. And by the way, we were discussing yesterday evening with Pierre, it's not a secret, I mean, let's think about how social partners can bring some messages to the next European elections. Okay. Can we contribute to that, I mean, as social partners? We can do it. It's really important that social partners bring in their independency, total independency, but some fundamental messages to the politicians that will run for the next European elections to make sure that the Europe we are building up is better than the one we have.
Jens, what do you say to that?
I always get a bit worried when people are talking about things are changing. No, things are not changing. We are changing things, because all changes are made by people. We're all in human business. And I think what you said about trust. Trust is key for stability. And if we want trust and if we want stability, you get that when people share the same values, they have the same idea of what challenges we are facing, and a common ownership to the labor market. And that's why it may sound a bit odd, but I would ask you to encourage your workers, your employees, to organize better than they do today. And I know from a business perspective, the answer is always, oh, no, then they are too strong. But I come from Denmark, and our organization percentage on the labor market is about 75%. We haven't had, in the private sector, a strike since 1998. That is stability, and that creates a really, really good investing environment. So think about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's true.
Right.
Maybe one point which is very important is employability of our people, because you're absolutely right. We are in a moving world. Everything is changing. So trust is sometimes very complicated to define in a very changing environment. We cannot provide jobs forever in our business. So we have to prepare our workers, employees, to train all their life and to have the assets, the weapons to change skills, to change companies, to change business. So I think it's a very important thing that we could discuss with the trade unions, social dialogue, and the flexi-security of Denmark is absolutely amazing. Maybe a bit expensive, but at least it's very, powerful, as I see it from France. So flexibility of the business, because they have to adapt all the time, but security of the people, to be sure that they are not going to be without a job for months or for years. So if we can emphasize on the fact that people will change skills, talents, and jobs, a couple of times during their life, and integrate that, because we are in a changing world, that's a key issue of what we could develop in terms of trust between social and economy, too. I think so.
Well, I know we could continue this conversation for very, very long, but unfortunately, we're going to have to start wrapping it up in the next couple of minutes. So I do want to get a few thoughts from each one of you on if you had to give advice, and the Denmark angle is also quite interesting to me, if you had to give some advice to every business out there onto one action, one message of how you can combine a value system for the future with corporate strategy going forward, how would you do it? What would you say to them, and what would it be? You want to start us off?
Well, I will start from what he said. I mean, the situation in Denmark is really emblematic. I mean, when you have dialogue, when you have capacity to discuss and to find common solutions, I mean, and invent, I mean, with creativity, I mean, also to shape the future. I mean, as you said, we need to change. It's not things changing on their own. I mean, we need to change, and the best way to change, and to change in a positive way, is having dialogue and having the capacity to shape the future together.
Yeah, just briefly, what I said before. Again, create a common values, share it with people. And the good thing about bigger unions, people are organized, is that the unions get less rabid. They are more balanced in their approach, because they also have the ownership. So yeah, that would be my advice.
I would say that we have to share a vision, common ambition, to share the present situation, and have a trustful dialogue in order, and some convictions, some good values together, in order to build the future together. And if we do that, I mean, this is true for business, this is true for country, this is true for Europe. So sharing an ambition, sharing where we are, and explaining, because I think the pedagogy and speaking simply to the people, because sometimes they don't understand what we say. So we should use very simple words, and in order that people understand what we say. Sometimes, they just don't understand, so we are too complicated. And I think it's very true for Europe system, Europe technocracy, Europe bureaucracy. I think we should simplify and go to the points and to the top priorities, in order that people understand what we want and what we say.
I would say my first advice would be competitive and stay competitive, because that's the only way that you can offer jobs in the future as well. And the second advice would be that I would say read the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN. Look what you are already doing right in that respect, and also think very deep the possibilities and opportunities that there are in these Sustainable Development Goals to make your company grow.
Yeah.
No, everything what was said here is absolutely right. But my first advice would be be responsible. I mean, don't count on directives, regulations. Just be responsible for your company, for your family, for your workers. Communicate, be honest, transparent, because we are living in the world that Years ago, I mean, a few years ago, it was possible, to hide something on the carpet. Not anymore. So if you are not doing your business in the right way, definitely somebody would show this to the world, and you are finished. Because again, it's not that will be just the news for 20 people. The entire world will know next day what happened in your relations with your customers, in your relations with your clients, in your relations with your workers. So I think if you want to be profitable, be responsible.
Well, can't think of a better note to end that wonderful panel on. Thank you very much for bringing a spotlight to, I think, an issue that we in the media keep talking about, but we always ask, how do you do that? How do you balance profitability and value systems? And from the sounds of it, you all think it's possible to do from different angles as long as we're all talking continuously. And I do that rather well. So thank you very much to my panel. Please give them a big round of applause.